Thrilled to welcome author Lauren Groff, who joins us live via video from her adopted home of Gainesville, Florida. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, Anne. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And to our listeners, I'll say I know there's a little glitch in our signal right now. We're working on it. Hopefully, we get past it. It's a Monday. Anyway, acknowledging that. Lauren, I wonder if we could start by asking you to read from your most recent novel, The Vaster Wilds.
I would
Um,
be absolutely delighted to, Anne.
Should
Thank
should we
you.
set up just a little bit of the backstory? I mean, this is a story that follows a servant girl who escapes from kind of starvation and smallpox in the colony of Jamestown. Is there anything else you want to add to it?
I think that it's pretty self-explanatory. She escapes and she's alone in the woods, and it's a spiritual survival tale, sort of a philosophical survival tale in a very real way. So the part I'm about to read doesn't actually need much explanation, so I should just dive in if that's all right with you.
Please, thank you.
All right. For some time she thought of putting on the boots, but if in climbing down the rock face she slipped and fell into the water, she was afraid that the boots would drag her to the bottom of the pool. And so she tied the latches together and hung the boots around her neck, then lowered herself with her arms and searched for the crack in the stone with her bare toes. At last she found it when her arms had nearly given out. She edged to the fuller ledge, then down to the slick stones that rimmed the pool. The water on her feet was shocking cold, but as her fever boiled her blood hot, the mist cooled her face and felt like a fine, soft silk upon her skin. She found her way to the top of the cliff face and put her wrappers on her wounded, bleeding feet, then laced her boots on again. The dried leather groaned in protest. Without building a fire to warm herself, she returned to the woods, where there was more opportunity to hide if she had any need of hiding. She would leave this place as soon as she could. She would put as much land as it was possible to put between herself and the men or the bear. She did not know which to fear more, man or bear, or perhaps her own small, starved, feverish self. And so, though the ache in her feet was mighty, she made her steps fleet until she felt herself running. She had heard, where was this? Yes, held fast upon Kit's knee when she was very young as he translated from the Latin into English tales of women who had run away and, in running, had become other things. A beautiful maiden, ravished and punished for the violation by becoming a white heifer that leapt a river. Girl become sunflower. Girl become dove. Girl become raven. Girls, all the many girls fleeing from pursuers, girls who were turned, even in their flight, into trees. And she ran as fast as her legs could take her, ran until all of her breath was lost, and she did not have the force to step over a tree root fully and tripped upon it, and fell from the path and tumbled down into a gap full of wintry dry leaves. There, as she lay, all her power left her. If her followers had loomed above the rise, whether they were real or imagined, she could not have stood to run anew. And it was there, lying in the gap of leaves, that she felt herself turning into a tree. It was as if in vision that she heard the command whispered by the wind and saw the whole open hole in the tree luring her in, the headlong dive, the hole closing from all sides into blackness, and the hunter's footsteps unheard but thundering past in vibration through the woods. Then the glorious growing, her feet stretching down to burrow luxurious into the rich loam of the forest, taking root, the crown rising above the trees, the arms outstretching multiply, arms growing arms, fingers bursting to leaf and yearning toward the sun.
Beautiful. That's Lauren Groff. She is reading from The Vaster Wilds, her latest book. Lauren, there is so much in that section that is, you know, echoes of the book, this sort of pursuit, the running, which this girl does kind of start to the end, um, fears, real or imagined, and trying to tease through what is real and what is not. And
Mhm.
themes that, you know, kind of appear in your other books in a lot of other ways. I wonder what it is about pursuit and sort of discerning fear um, from reality or distilling that down is inspiring to you.
Well, in this particular book, I was responding to my own sort of ecological terrors, right? We live in Florida. Florida is an incredibly ecologically fragile state, as one knows if one spends a lot of time or even every day, just a few minutes a day outside and sort of sees. And I think that I and many other people respond to our terrors by telling stories, right? And there's this amazing person who studied fairy tales named Bruno Bettelheim. And Bruno Bettelheim used to say that fairy tales were almost an inoculation against the terror of being alive, right? The inoculation against the worst possible things that could have happened. We take a narrative and it brings us from the worst possible thing into, a happy ending. Excuse me. So I think that that's something that I put into all of my books, sort of my biggest fears, my biggest joys, all of my passion. And this book was really rethinking the narratives of how colonists came to what we call, the United States now, how we interacted with the land, and how basically women were treated. I mean, this is one of the themes that are in all of my books: how women have been treated historically.
There are some challenges to writing a book about just one person, mostly in the wilderness, mostly just referred to as girl, almost nameless.
Mhm.
How did you, I mean, you find a lot of workarounds to that. Can you discuss kind of how you were able to incorporate so much dialogue and interaction in a story that starts so solitary?
Yeah. So another thing that is in almost all of my books is this love of and fascination with community. It's just something that is fundamentally at the center of who I am as a writer. And I wanted this book to be, in some ways, almost a photo negative of community, right? So there's nothing less community based than a single person alone in the woods. And at first, one of the very first drafts that I wrote, and I wrote many, many drafts of this book before it was finished, she was all alone and she didn't have much of an internal narrative. So it was very, the book was in very distant third person, almost spoken from a hawk's eye view of the girl as she goes through the woods. And it was extraordinarily lonely. And so I decided, even though she's alone, she has had a wealth of experience, even in the 17 years she's been alive. She has memories. She has songs and music in her. She has this burning faith in what she believes to be God in the beginning of the book that sort of morphs and becomes something different. And then the forest itself comes up as a presence and starts to sort of speak to her, to tell her that perhaps human exceptionalism is not the way that the world is set up. Perhaps this is a false narrative given to her by the people she was raised within in her civilization. Perhaps maybe if she paid more attention, if she looked harder at the forest, at the trees, at the animals, at the grubs, at all of the things, she would find herself less existentially lonely. And I believe this to be the case, right? This is one of the ideas underneath this book is to sort of collapse the human hierarchy in which humanity is at the very peak of the pyramid closest to the ear of God, and sort of start to see us as parallel to all of the creatures of the woods. And there's this amazing indigenous writer named Robin Wall Kimmerer who talks a lot about this almost rhizome shape of existence, of life, right? An idea that we are equal to the tree, we are equal to the whale, right? We are equal to this life that surround us and teams. And I think that this resetting of narrative, this reimagining of the narrative of humanity is especially urgent in ecological times that we're facing at the moment.
Yeah, I sort of got echoes of the book Overstore, which is kind of this animating of nature and a recognition of kind of its, I don't know, humanity is probably not the right word since we're defining something different. Um, but I wanted to ask you because you've alluded to writing many drafts of this book, and I know that you've talked in the past about your process, which is kind of bananas. It's a really intensive. Tell us a little bit about kind of how you begin a book and what stages you go through.
Yes, absolutely. First, I have to say I love the Overstory, and it was one of the books that I looked at over and over again when I was writing this one. So thank you, Richard Powers.
Mm.
But yes, my process is absolutely bonkers. I do not recommend it to anyone unless you have OCD like me. So I discovered early on in my writing life that I can get obsessed with a single sentence for 4 months if I don't put in mechanisms that make me go forward and push forward. And so I write everything by hand. I love longhand writing. I like the physical aspects of it too, the smell of the paper, the smell of the ink, sort of the feel of everything. It's very much more tactile. It doesn't look like it's finished already as it is on the screen when you're writing on a computer. And I write a fast, ugly first draft, and I don't reread a single word because I can't actually read my own handwriting. And then I put it to the side and I start over again. And in that resetting, that sort of catharsis, it's in some ways it's like a big forest fire, an intentional fire that comes through a forest, burns off all of the underbrush, the scrub, and leaves the big, tall, living, standing oak trees. And so that's what, anything that survives between the first and second, third, fourth draft. That's alive, and that's sort of something that the story requires, something that the story needs. And the other thing too is, I do believe one needs to really understand the foundations of the work that one is doing before one can do the really fine brickwork of word building. So I spent a lot of time in the very first drafts working on structure, architecture, on characters, on sort of the characters' lives off the page, on all sorts of things that go into the book that may not be immediately visible to the reader, but are really, really important. And so by the time I get to the final draft, which is for this book, something like 13 or 14 complete handwritten drafts through, I know the story in and out. The great Canadian writer Alice Munro once said that writing a short story for her was like picking her way through a house that she knew intimately. She knew everything that was in every drawer. You know, she'd pull up in a drawer, she'd know that there's spools of thread there. So all she had to do was sort of make her way physically through the house. And I see this process of iteration as almost creating a three-dimensional printing of the story that I can then pick my way through in the Alice Munrovian manner.
And yet that requires discarding, vast quantities of probably terrific writing. Um,
No, it's all bad.
well, I saw your editor quoted as saying you wrote a version of the Vaster Wilds in iambic pentameter just to kind of
Yes.
see how it went. Nothing there that you want to save. I mean, you're comfortable tossing all of that.
Oh, no. So, actually, I did it because, I sometimes I impose my ego upon the story, and that's when the story starts to die a little bit, right? If stories I like to see as sort of independent creatures living beyond the bounds of the person, is sort of translating it from the air. And so I think when I impose my ego, things shut down. The story starts to get unhappy. I don't like it. It doesn't like me, right? So I started the fourth draft thinking I would only write in entirely in iambic phrase. It wasn't pentameter because it just kept going on and on and on. Right? It was like whatever a million pentameter is. But it was really bad, and it was intentionally bad. I was trying to break the sort of calcified structure of the story that I had sort of forced on my book, and it worked, right? So breaking it intentionally, making this thing that was intentionally not going to be good, but giving it a rhythm, opened everything up. I began as a poet and as a formal poet because I really, really love the way that when you sit down to write a sonnet or a villanelle, the form forces you into thinking thoughts that you never thought that you knew, right? They never knew that you contained. And so forcing myself to write in this form broke open the structure and the characters and let me know what the story itself wanted of it.
If you're just joining us, we are talking to award-winning author and Gainesville bookstore owner Lauren Groff. You can join our conversation by giving us a call at 904-549-2937 or emailing firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I want to ask you about the idea of, you know, failure and, writing something that you know is not working and being willing to discard it. Excuse me.
Yeah.
How what do you take from the experience of, like, I won't call it failure, but not succeeding?
Oh, I love fail I like to embrace the idea of failure. I think we don't allow ourselves the grace of failure as much as we deserve. And I don't mean academically, I think, right? I tell my children all the time, you can fail in everything, but in school. But I believe in failure. This is the way that humans have learned to grow in the world. If you look at a child, the way that they learn to walk is through falling constantly. Um, I had this epiphany when my younger son was really little, maybe 3 or 4. Both of my sons were super into Legos, and we had Legos all over the house. It was very painful in the night, when you walk on them. But I was walking by the sunroom one day, and I was watching my 4-year-old son building this structure that had taken him, like, 2 weeks. There's this entire city of Legos, and, he was taking such, like, joy in the colors, in the sounds, right, in the tactile sensual nature of putting these things together. And then if something didn't work, he just broke it, right? Out of joy, out of pleasure, and built something better with a new idea. So I think that failure, we should all allow ourselves a little bit more failure in our lives, a little more risk, understanding that it doesn't say something about who we are inherently, but it's really showing us either the limits of our own understanding and abilities. And if we see these limits, we can either choose to push the limits a little bit further each time we attempt something, or we can find a way to go around them. And I like this a lot because I look at all of the writers that I venerate, and there are hundreds, like thousands maybe. But one of them is the great American writer Cormac McCarthy, who wrote some extraordinary books, including Blood Meridian, which is one of my top 10 books of all times. And if you look at his entire oeuvre, you see that he was absolutely incapable, in my opinion, of writing a living woman. He wrote a lot of dead women, and they were all, gorgeous. But the living women, they were tough. They were tough for him. But I think he understood this about himself. And so as a result, he created this work, this corpus of work that talked about American violence and American masculinity, and how violence and masculinity work together to build this detrimental society. So I actually see that embracing, understanding where we fail and where we can't quite push the boulder a little bit further, gives us our superpowers in a very real way.
You also write around, gender, quite a bit, and in terms of, women's mentioned kind of historically how they've been treated, but also kind of this theme of menace, which sometimes is, embodied by male characters or maybe perceived menace sometimes, this uncertainty, about, who is the enemy, but very often it has a darker cast.
Hmm. Yeah, so I don't know if you clocked it in what I just read, but there's a throughout the book, there's this kind of joyous pitting of what would you rather
Mm.
meet in the woods, a man or a bear?
Right.
And I'm not saying that I invented that, but my book came out 6 months before that meme. I'm just saying. But yeah, so I think part of this is being born into a cis female body, and having situations many times through my life where I felt really physically threatened by being a woman. And I'm a tall, incredibly muscular woman, right? I'm athletic. And it doesn't matter because, when for millennia, a certain class of people are considered subservient, there will be bone deep internalized misogyny, even in people who believe themselves to be relatively free in their thinking. It's really, really hard to resist the cages that we are born into as a culture, and misogyny is one of those cages. And so, even I, have had to do a great deal of work to try to figure out, my some of my knee jerk reactions too. And I'm hypersensitive to women and the way that women are treated and seen in the world. I'm raising two enormous boys. They are 16 and 14 at the moment. And it's hard for them to have a mom as like vociferous as I am, and like really passionate about equality as I am. But the other day I asked my older son, who's 16, if he was a feminist, and he said, "Oh my God, of course. I mean, the opposite is a misogynist, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not a misogynist. Obviously, I'm a feminist," and
Right.
that made me feel good for 5 minutes.
Uh, yeah, well done. I want to take a call from Trisha Booker. She's actually a guest on this program, an author, and lives here in Jacksonville. Good morning, Trisha. Go ahead.
Good morning, Anne. Good morning, Lauren. I am such a huge fan of your work and of your bookstore, and I reread the end of Vaster Wilds this morning in anticipation of talking to you, so I'm kind of like a weepy fangirl right now talking to you. I love everything that you have said about misogyny, but my two favorite works of yours are Matrix and Vaster Wilds. And the more I think about the process I went through reading them and kind of thinking about them afterwards, I wonder if you ever struggled with the endings, like where these women were going to, what we were getting to. I found myself in the Vaster Wilds thinking, I want something good to happen to her, and I want her something to happen that is going to kind of cement her happiness. And I feel like you really had a choice to make, whether you were going to go in this direction where the vast majority of people want her to go without giving away the ending, or a different direction that is still going to kind of give her meaning to her life and kind of fulfill her life's, I don't know, truth. I'm kind of rambling, but you know what I mean? I think we all wanted something to happen to her that was going to give her peace. And
Sure.
it went in a completely different direction than I expected.
Yeah, it's
And I'll take my call off the end.
Thank you for no spoilers, Trisha, and so nice to talk to you. Thank you for calling in. I do have an answer for this. This is one of the things that I struggled with in the many drafts of writing this book. I think one of the things that this book is trying to do is to subvert the old narratives that have turned out to be really detrimental to who we are as a civilization. And they're really detrimental to how we engage with the natural world. So one of the things that I needed to subvert in this book was the expected life ending, at the end of the book, or the expected ending of the book, which I think the vast majority of people did want, and I have a lot of thoughts about that. But the other thing that I was working on too was a different conception of what a happy ending is. So I do know that throughout the book, materially, her body is really fading fast as she's running through the woods. She's starving. She's got like latent smallpox, right? Like she's not doing well. But as she's materially going downward, she's also at the same time anagogically going upward. So the anagogical level is a level of medieval exegesis where everything is read as going toward the heavens. And so I wanted her spiritually to bloom, even if physically she was withering. And so this was just a different form of happiness, a different taste of the vast universal mysteries that we call God. And I do think she gets to that place. It's just resetting our expectations of what a successful ending would be. And I believe that if you are able to reconcile yourself to God at the end, whatever you call God, which has um, not much in my worldview to do with religion, but with the great overwhelming mysteries of the universe, I think that is a really profoundly successful life.
And you do kind of play with the ending. You kind of give us a view of what could be and set that up. And you do that in other ways in other books. I know that in Fates and Furies, you kind of use this omniscient voice, it's bracketed throughout to kind of sometimes give us a look at something that you don't actually write about, but that happened, like a chimney fire, or comments on whether a person's behavior is appropriate. You kind of give us a different vision. Can you just talk about, in what cases you're using that, how that serves you as a writer?
Yeah. I do love to play, and I love to play with the eye of God. So my background is in French and English, the history of literature in both French and English. And I've tracked over the centuries the way that the omniscient eye has sort of bloomed in the novel and then faded out of the novel. And right now we're very much in a time of the first person, right? Like being pegged to a single consciousness. The vast majority of books coming into the world are in the first person in terms of fiction, which I find very strange, right? Because I love the omniscient. I love the looseness and the freedom. I love the way that we can sort of like go wide out and then come back in really closely. Middlemarch is one of my favorite books of all times, and I love these moments when George Eliot starts to speak in the authorial voice and sort of it's almost like a golden haze that she casts over these characters that she's writing about. It's really an extraordinary spell that she casts. So I do think, I think playing around with this thing in some ways is being a little bit cheeky in this time. I think one of the reasons that a lot of writers are abandoning the omniscient, abandoning the third person, is there's a lot of distrust in institutions, understandably, right? I mean, this is not just coming out of mid-century philosophers and literary critics, right? This idea of subjectivity, of storytelling, of the instability of the word to contain truth. It's also coming out of like this larger cultural, I guess, fear or trepidation toward institution, or feeling like we are experts, right? I mean, I like to resist this because I think that there are actually experts in the world. Or there are actually scientists who study things who have more to say about vaccines than just some guy plucked off the street and put into a position of power over us, right? I think that we there are people we need to listen to, and I also, there are times when I think playing with authority is a really fun game that authors can engage in. So this is all, this is I do what I can on a daily basis to come to the page with as much joy as possible, and this is one of those ways.
If you're just joining us, we are talking to Lauren Groff. She is now a Florida-based author, author of Matrix, The Vaster Wilds, Fates and Furies, a number of stories in the New Yorker magazine, including an excellent one in the December issue. I want to ask you a little bit about fame, though, Lauren, because you have had a couple of brushes with it in extraordinary ways, including, Fates and Furies was one of Barack Obama's, it was his favorite book of 2015. Just kind of an enormous boost, I would guess, in terms of, your own reception as a writer, but just kind of, um, I think bringing your name into a whole other realm of kind of popularity. You also, though, your book Florida was the inspiration for a song that was co-written by Florence Welsh of Florence and the Machine and Taylor Swift called Florida.
Yeah. Yes. That was hilarious and wonderful. So with the Barack Obama thing, it was magnificent. I dropped. I think my heart stopped actually for a second. He wrote me a letter in his own handwriting, which is wonderful. I have to say, there's a little bit of irony in this. inherently feminist writer suddenly coming to the attention. Men didn't read me before Barack Obama did, and suddenly it was okay to read me
Uh,
after Barack Obama, which, whatever. I didn't need a powerful man to say that I was good, but I'm very grateful to him for that. And then the Florence Welch, that came out of nowhere. And I absolutely love her music. I think Florence and the Machine is extraordinary. I wrote an article last year about Florence for the New York Times Style magazine about she's just a prophetess. And, Taylor's pretty great too. I didn't get to meet her. But I know Florence, so there's one degree of separation.
how did you learn of it? I mean, was it like recognizing it when you heard the song, or did somebody give you a heads up?
So Florence actually put it on her Instagram and said, when Taylor came to me to write this collection, I've never been to Florida. I don't know anything about Florida. The only thing I know is this book by Lauren Groff. And actually, if you look at the song, what the lyrics that Florence sings, it's almost directly from a short story of mine called "I Wall," which is just wild. It's wild.
About a hurricane, and you write about nature a lot. You write beautifully about Florida wildlife, and I want to ask you a little bit about Florida. I mean, you live here now. You've lived in Gainesville. That's where your husband is from for a couple of generations. Um, it's also where you've chosen to open this bookstore called The Links. Can you just tell us a little bit about what is happening in Florida that motivated you to open the bookstore?
Absolutely. So I did not like Florida for the first 10 years I lived here, to be honest. Um, but then I started reading about Florida, and I started really paying attention to, the changes in the prairie on a daily basis. Payne's Prairie is just one of the most magical places in Florida. And I fell in love. So we've been here for 19 years, and I'm deeply, deeply in love with Florida now. So what a few years ago, 2 years ago, my family and I got to go to Berlin for 6 months at the American Academy there in Berlin on Lake Wannsee. And this was when the state of Florida started opening up the floodgates for book challenges and book bans. And it made international news because, everyone's appalled by book bans. It's very unpopular. Even in the state of Florida, 73% of Floridians are against book bans and book challenges. And, Germans would pull me to the side and be like, oh my God, you got to stop this now. This is the point of the spear of authoritarianism. You have to stop book bans. We know what happens. There's a great poet named Heinrich Heine who once said, Dort wo man Buchen verbrennt man auch am Ende Menschen. So in the places where one burns books, one will one day burn people. And that just chilled me to my absolute marrow. And we got back, and we'd been talking about opening a bookstore for, I don't know, 12 years at that point, without any real plans. My husband's from a bookstore family. His grandfather opened the Florida bookstore on University Avenue here in Gainesville in 1942. So he knew the bookstore business, and I knew the bookstore from visiting 2,000 of them in my life as a writer. Right? And so we immediately found an incredible space in South Main Station. And here in Gainesville, it's sort of very central. It's got parking. It's got a bunch of restaurants and amphitheater all around it. It's really amazing. And we just went for it. And we signed the lease, got the keys on January 1st, and we're open for our big grand opening last year on April 28th. And our mission is to uphold, celebrate, and disseminate books that are currently being challenged and banned in the state of Florida, and to celebrate Florida writers. Because I don't know if you know, but the reception of Florida for the rest of the country is that we are just a band of idiots. And I want to demolish that argument. I want to say, no, there are incredibly great people here working really, really hard, trying to make life better for everyone else, and not just people who are trying to steal, the public lands from us, trying to sort of force their own vision, small vision of the world on the rest of us. We have been lucky. We've gotten a lot of beautiful international acclaim. We just had an article come out in France, Marie Claire. Right. This is. I think this is we have multiple modes, and one of them is as sort of a lighthouse as much as possible to tell people that Florida is worthy of saving, right? Florida has an extraordinarily deep literary bench. We are culturally incredible. We are full of artists. We are full of subversive people. We are full of great people, and we are here to protect the vulnerable, right? We're here to love our LGBTQI plus friends. We're here to protect people who do not have the papers but deserve to be in the United States, like my ancestors, right, who came without papers and yet were able to thrive here. So we see ourselves in the punk town of Gainesville, which I love so much, as a sort of a source of joyous resistance. We do not hate anyone. If Ron DeSantis were to walk in, we would load up his arms with all the banned books and he would enjoy them.
And I'm interested in what kind of space you were trying to create. I mean, there has been a number of really famous writers to create bookstore spaces in recent years. I'm thinking of people like Ann Patchett, Judy Blume, who've um, created a bookstore that has become in part a destination because of their own fame and beloved stature. What was it that you are hoping to deliver? I mean, what do you love about a bookstore, and what are you trying to create there at the Links?
Well, a bookstore is always an inherently revolutionary space, I believe, because they are places outside of public funding where you can find the books that are going to change your life, that are going to reflect not only your life back to you and sort of make it seem acceptable. Some people do not know that they're gay until they come into a bookstore and find a book that speaks to their heart of hearts. It's also a place to look through into other people's lives to sort of gain the understanding that all humans are worthy of dignity and respect and love. And the more books we read, the more tolerant we are of difference, right? And this is why books are so dangerous. This is why people are trying to ban and challenge them. In fact, in the state of Florida, PEN America, this great, wonderful organization that has an entire office devoted to fighting book bans in Miami, they did a study and they saw that last year in Florida, 4,561 books were banned or challenged here in Florida. That is so many books. And a lot of those books, almost 40% of them have LGBTQI plus themes. Now, 40% of books being published do not have LGBTQI plus themes. So it's these are books disproportionately being punished for the LGBTQI plus themes. 44% of the books being panned and challenged are diverse, or by diverse authors, or talking about the Black experience, the Indigenous experience, the Latina experience, Asian experience. So the books that are being targeted are the ones that speak toward common humanity and toward respect of difference. And I find that outrageous, right? That is just outrageous to me. I'm a parent. My kids are fabulous. They're incredible readers, both of them. And I have never thought that it is necessary to ban books for my own children, because I'm a good parent and I sit down and I talk to them. And I talk to them, when they were little, they really loved Hervé's books, Tintin, right? Tintin is mid-century comic book, and it's extremely racist. It's just extremely racist. But it was an opportunity as a parent to talk about racism and colonialism, and to talk about how these things can be reflected in art, and to be aware of these things in their own lives, in my children's own lives. And so I just find this whole horrific push of banning books, taking books out of the hands of people you don't even know, to be outrageous. It's an outrageous affront.
What is it that your perception of Florida, and I think that a lot of your writing, it can be very dark, but is very hopeful, I think, about the nature of humanity,
Mhm.
and the power of endurance, which is
Mhm.
something that, surfaces a lot. I mean, you have in your own life a very athletic, background. I think your sister is an Olympian triathlete, so there's a lot of endurance, I think, in your
Yeah.
nature. Um,
Yeah.
but in terms of remaining hopeful, or at least remaining resilient, how do you see the bookstore or your own writing playing
Mm.
into your goals?
Yeah, well, I mean, I believe in humanity. I believe in the goodness of most people. Most people are not out to do bad things. Most people may be misled or misguided. I think people fundamentally, unless something goes very, very wrong, people are good. And as a student of history, I love history so much. I think it's so important that we all engage with actual historical fact. I can see that there are cycles of civilization, right? As we're going through these cycles of repression and expansion, and it feels in the United States right now. This is my opinion, as if we're going into a very deep cycle of repression. But I think having faith in people, if they have the right information, that they will do the right thing. It really is faith. It's not based on empirical evidence, but it is based on my understanding of history, right? It is based on my hope, and it is based on this idea that um, I really do think people are good, or I hope that people are good. I come to every situation with the primary hope that people will do their best, and I think more times than not that is the case. Of course, there are outliers, but I do believe in this. So I think that as much as possible, every single one of us on our daily basis, in our daily lives, we need to find places to insist upon the goodness of other people, to insist that no, we're going to create an open space for other people to be who they are and to love them for who they are, and to allow them to come to the goodness that resides within them. And it may take time, but if we are constantly on the lookout for that goodness, we will find it. I believe this.
Well, that's a great place to leave it. Lauren Groff, author, Florida resident, owner of the Lynx Bookstore in Gainesville. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you, everyone.